Okay, so welcome. My name is Ray Lutz with Citizens Oversight, and I'm the main lead behind AuditEngine. I'm going to give you a presentation today about the 3 audits that we did in both Georgia and in Dane County, Wisconsin. The 2 counties in Georgia were Bartow County and Fulton County. And these were mostly, well, it was part of our development effort to go ahead and do some more counties. Not that we had any real suspicions, but these were generally fairly close. And, these states were in the news. And so there was a great interest in this. So let's see here. I believe I'm sharing my screen. Can you see the slides? Someone can confirm. Okay. So basically, I have a master's degree in electronics engineering. I was involved in standards development and developing scanners, mostly laser printers, and other technology fax machines. I was in the fax standards committees and the like. And then in about 2003, I guess, or 2006, I got started with this, just basically providing oversight. But what I want to mention here is auditing. And first, I want to cover a little bit about risk limiting audits, or they're sometimes called RLAs very frequently. And these, as you can see, like if you have a fairly large margin, you can get by with very few samples. I mean, it's still 500 is kind of rare to get up above, but you don't need very many samples to verify that the election results are correct. But once you get down into these low values, the number of samples goes up. This is the ballot comparison audit, which is the most efficient one. Efficient, by that I mean how many ballots you have to compare. And if you did a ballot polling audit, which is kind of like going out and just doing a poll, but doing it with ballots, it goes up even faster. You can see the numbers here are really much higher than in the prior. You see, you've got only up to 4,500, but in this one, it exceeds 5,000 right away. And so it's hard to get to do a risk limiting audit where you're doing sampling if you have tight elections. Now, a ballot image audit is a little bit different approach, where we take relatively high resolution images. They're 200 dots per inch generally. They're not super high resolution, but they're pretty high compared to what you look at on your screen, which is usually 72. It is hand marked paper ballot, but it can be about a ballot that's generated from a BMD, a ballot marking device. And most counties are now using this type of equipment. And what a ballot image audit does is it just exhaustively recomputes the result of the election by retabulating everything and then comparing it. They can cover all the contests, even ones that only are in, just a very minuscule part of the area. And even those that are down ballot that may not be covered by an RLA. A lot of RLA implementations today only cover maybe 1, 2, 3 contests, and it's very hard to cover all those contests. It doesn't explode into a costly hand count unless there's a problem. Okay, if a problem is detected, no matter how you do the audits, you're probably going to end up doing a hand count of everything, because nobody's going to trust anything but having everybody get there and do the hand count once you detect a problem. But it doesn't require a costly hand count to be very, very precise. And it can detect all the voter intent issues, whether overvote is not checked right. All of these things it can detect very, very well. Almost all the election processing errors, and nearly all malicious attacks that are opportunistic, that they're deployed at the opportunity, like let's just change the results. That it'll catch that. I'll go over the one case that we need to guard against. It provides higher confidence to election officials because they can see really closely what's going on. You'll see that in a second. And it minimizes innocent fix-up errors. This is what I call when the election workers themselves try to get the audit to be clean. They're used to fixing problems. So when they see that the audit isn't perfectly clean, they go, okay, well, I'm going to fix that problem. It turns out that defeats the audit. You want it to actually detect things, not to not detect things. So this is what I see happen a lot. And it doesn't have that because it does everything. You know, it covers all the ballots. This only is a problem with statistical type audits. It can be done by third-party audit services, and it is compatible with the voter-facing precinct scanners that don't necessarily keep the ballots in order, which is hard for risk-limiting audits to deal with. Now, if you do find something, even if you never look at paper, you still find it. Okay, you will find all the voter intent issues, nearly any processing errors that occur, all of these things it will find. And if it does find it, it's found it. No one's going to say, well, you hacked that in there and you made it find an error. That's not going to happen. So there is that one case. Okay, now just the steps, big picture here, is that we have to get the files, all right? And for AuditEngine, we have to upload those into the data center that we're using. We use zip archives to keep everything together in terms of all those ballot images, maybe 50,000 per archive. So we don't want that, you know, lots of ballot image files all just flying around. Need to be put together, and we're working on ways to cyber secure those as well. And the cast vote records, we can work without them, but we really like to compare ballot to ballot between what we get and what the voting system got. The ballot style masters really helps the mapping process if we get those. We don't have to have them, but it makes it be many times easier. So the first thing we do is we upload everything, and then there's a setup and checking of the data. And this actually turns out to be a fairly large part. Depends on how messy the data is. Sometimes it's really good. And I noticed that Joseph Quirks from Bartow County is with us. And he needs to be proud. He did a really good job with this data, as you'll see. So we didn't have a lot of struggle with this in that case. But in other cases, it's more work. So we also at this stage gather up all the metadata from all of the ballots, everything that we can find. Now, sometimes they mark things in the zip file. Sometimes they mark them in other, in the CVR. They give us metadata that way. And then we go through a mapping process where we basically map, here is the contest, here's where it is on the ballot, and this is what that means. It's basically linking that target on the ballot to its meaning. And if we have the ballot style masters, we know exactly where all the targets are. All we have to do is link them to the meaning. And so it really reduces the possibility for error there. After mapping the styles, we go through extracting all of the votes from all the images. In this case, AuditEngine uses up to 10,000, we're approved for now, separate CPU, virtual computers in the cloud at the same time. So we can use them for up to, say, 15 minutes at a time, and it'll recycle them if we need more time. But generally, we can do, say, 2 million ballots in 15 minutes. And this is a real power of how we're doing this compared to trying to do it in one computer on site. Then we, after that, we do a comparison and report. And we have one of, I think it's the best comparison in the world right now. When we do the extraction, one of the key parts is actually determining what does that oval say? Is it a dark, is it dark, or is it not dark? Now, most of the systems use fixed thresholding where they have a number, which they say if it's bigger than this number, it's dark, and if it's less than this number, it isn't. Clear Ballot uses a thresholding which is set kind of interactively, where you say, I want it here because this looks like the place. We do it on a ballot by ballot basis, so it's adaptive to every single ballot and the habits of that voter and how maybe dark the scan happens to be. We use a larger evaluation area, which includes some of the circles and check marks that miss the bubble. You'll see that in a second. And we do a better result, and we also resolve overvotes. And we mark these if we're trying to resolve them with a gray flag so that we know that it was heuristically treated. And a heuristic is something that is sort of a rule that you can use. It doesn't always work, but works most of the time. Basically, if we get a very dark mark and one normal mark, then it's usually reviewed as a cross out, like a really dark one. And if it's a light mark and one normal mark, then it's usually considered to be a hesitation mark. So those are the two cases where we do it. Now with BMD ballots, we read the text on the ballot summary card, and we don't read the QR code. So if there is errors in the QR code, and you may have heard about the Halderman, J. Alex Halderman from University of Michigan, made the point, and I think this is something we've acknowledged for a while, that you could have a hack inside the BMD that would provide the person with vote for Joe Biden here, but the QR code says vote for Trump, for example. All right. And so you would know that because nobody can read this. It's not something you can just hold up your phone to and read it and make sense of it. All right. So we read all of this text, and when we process, and this is an example of a Dominion BMD ballot summary card. The ES&S ballot summary card is a little bit different, but basically the same concept. Now, here are some things that I'm showing you that we evaluate sort of correctly, where we have the cross out, and this we award to the one that's normally marked. Now, in a voting system and even in clear ballot, they say this is an overvote, and so they don't resolve it. Also, we detect things that are near the bubble but not in it, and so that would be left as an undervote. You wouldn't even be necessarily reviewing an undervote because they're not really broken out that way in the voting system. Similarly, circles around bubbles, we are also detecting those, and X's that don't quite go into the bubble. In this case, they didn't get it. Trump didn't get the vote, but it's obviously voter intent. But sometimes it's pretty hard, you know, like this one here, where he wants this one and these he doesn't want, but you have to follow the arrows. Pretty tricky, all right? And similarly, this one was very difficult because the guy X'd everything out that he didn't want and just put a little bubble next to the ones that he did. So you have to look at this to figure it out. There's no way you would trust any machine to figure out this sort of complexity. Okay, I don't even think a machine learning could do it, right? Some images are stretched out of shape. This we found specifically with ES&S ballots, and these were from Dane County, Wisconsin. And when they're stretched out of shape, what happens here is the ballot is going through the scanner and it pauses briefly. And the scanner, you know, keeps going and sort of repeats that, and it kind of maybe goes along slightly and gets slow, but then it gets going again. And so when we detect this, we mark it as a unprocessed ballot. And if you wanted to really get into, you know, detailing it down to the individual ballots, then we don't trust anything to really process these kind of weird ballots. So those are put aside. This did not happen at all in Georgia. This was only something that happened in Wisconsin, and it's something we see a lot with ES&S. But the Georgia machines were almost brand new. In fact, they're basically brand new machines. Once they get flat rollers and they need maintenance, maybe this is going to happen more. And if we see it a lot, we can alert the officials to say, look, put these machines out of service because they're not giving good results. Now, this is what Neil was bringing up. There is a possibility of an image alteration attack, and that is where the basically the image is altered, and it is not reflected. Basically, the cast vote record is made after the image is made. So if the hacker, say, had some code in the scanner that said, like when you get one that shows a vote for candidate A, which we don't like, just throw in this other image, just completely erase that one and replace it with this other image, which has all of our desired candidates on it, and use that one instead. That's be the easiest way to do it. Just substitute the whole image. Don't worry about, you see this where they're putting the bubbles around and substituting them. Who would waste time with that? Just put in the whole image that you found one before that you like, and you say, I'm just going to substitute in the one here, and no one will be the wiser. So you could happen. And the way to guard against this, I believe this is a very rare kind of thing to happen because it is not opportunistic. You have to plan ahead. You have to put your code in ahead. You have to determine how much of a hack you're going to put it on, and how much deviation you want in advance. And so it's best if we look at some ballots for this. All right. And I think a reasonable defense is to randomly look at images as you're scanning them. As they're being scanned, you have the staff that's scanning them in a central scanning facility. Look for stretched ballots, look for registration errors, look for anything on a sampling basis, and there's standards for how to do that. It does not mean that you have to compare it to the same level as what they talk about with the CVR, because this is such a rare attack. We handle every other type of attack, all voter, interpretation errors, vote interpretation errors, all errors in terms of things that could be injected into the cast vote record later. So those are all caught. So we'll move along from this. The history is that I generated the concept back in like 2006 and 2008, and other people have talked about it, but I video recorded a hand counted, special election here in San Diego that I was really involved in. And I thought, gee, I video recorded the whole thing. Why not take pictures of every ballot and then we could just check them, right? And then 3 years ago, almost to the day, interestingly enough, if you can mute Neil, that would appreciate it because I can hear your keyboard. So 3 years ago, almost to the day, let's see, why am I not going back? Here we go. I announced this in 2019 at the Berkeley Election Integrity Conference. And we had an initial just, something slapped together there. There's gone a lot of development since then. We tackled Dane, Wisconsin, the 2019 spring election as our first election. And we thought this is going to be just like every other case, pretty much. Not at all. It has completely different things. So we thought we were going to be able to do completely automated recognition of the contests on the styles, and it would be very, very easy to do that way, but it's not. So we went along and we did the 3 Florida county case study, which is available for reading. And I have reprocessed Volusia, which we have time, I might take a look at again with you. But Collier, Port St. Lucie, Collier was extremely clean all the way down to the very single ballot. There was nothing missing, no deviations whatsoever. With regard to the count of ballots in the ballot images, that's really nice. Volusia and Port St. Lucie had some other issues, particularly Volusia, even though their election turned out clean, they had some issues that they had to deal with. We'll put that aside for now. Now, what I'm showing you are these 2 Georgia counties, Bartow and Fulton, and Dane County, Wisconsin. We're going to kind of do those in parallel so you can kind of see them as we do it. I myself thought of it irrespective of what other people may have done at this time. And so there may be other people in the world that weren't me who thought of this. And I know they had the Transparency Project in Humboldt, and maybe you thought of it too. But what happened here is the AuditEngine history is this history. AuditEngine history was this. Now let's go on. So the comparison process is that basically I want to say that, first of all, I haven't seen anybody that does this type of this sort of rigorous comparison that we're doing. They usually compare it against aggregated totals, batch by batch, and say they're about the same. We can go on, but they don't compare it with this sort of detailed way that we're doing. So we take all sheets at the top. Some of them are fully agreed with nothing at all, no variations. There's no write-ins, no overvotes, no disagreements. And so those are all sheets that are fully agreed. That's this first box. The next box are partially agreed sheets where a contest on a sheet. So there's a sheet of one ballot, and on that sheet is a contest. And if that contest has write-ins, overvotes, or disagreements between the cast vote record and what we're saying, then it is put in the partially agreed sheet is everything left over after we've taken that contest out that was a variant. And then these are the contest variants. These are everything that was pulled from partially agreed sheets. Now, if you pull everything from the partially agreed sheet, the sheet still is here as a shell with nothing in it. And then all the contest variants are pulled out as separate records. And then we put these into write-ins, overvotes, gray flags, or normal disagreed so that we can take a look at them. So that's sort of the process. We also have ballot variants where there's something major like unprocessable, stretched, other types of ballots, and other things there. So there's completely unprocessable or things that were a problem with the ballot variants. We don't get very many of those. Now, in these three counties, let's just go over quickly the stats and how they look, because the populations are quite a bit different with, that should be a comma. So Fulton's a bit over 1 million. Bartow's just a bit over 100,000, so about 10% the size. Dane's about 500,000. And the eligible voters are similar, basically percentage of the population generally is, I find, is about 50, 54% or something like that. It tends to be. And then the number of ballots cast you can see here. And the partisan bias, either it's deep red as it was in Bartow County or deep blue, these other two. With that said, even though the counties were deep red or deep blue, the statewide margin, the third one from the bottom here, is very, very close. But in Georgia was under 12,000, and it was about 20,000 in Wisconsin. So statewide, it's a close contest, even though that presidential contest I'm looking at. So even though these are deep red or deep blue, that's sort of beside the point. The voting systems were either Dominion, ES&S, and Dane. Georgia has all Dominion the same. Then there were, as you see here in Bartow, no repeated ballots, no missing images, and no missing cast vote records. Thank you very much, Joseph Kirk, for doing a good job there. This is what we really appreciate, getting that. And Fulton, not quite the same. So there was 262 repeated ballot images, means they're not a mistake, or I mean, to the extent that they were scanned twice or anything like that. They're not regarded as two separate images. They are two image files that were in the zip file in different places, but were the same ballot number. And so those did not get treated twice, but we still have to skip over them. All right, so our software notices that they're there and then does not treat them. And Dane, there was more of those just because we had to get several batches of zip files to us. That should be a comma too, so that's 3,000, not 3 point something. And then big deal in Fulton was we had 380,000 missing images because they accidentally deleted them. So we didn't get to do the entire Dane County. This would be mostly the BMD ballots. So we got all of the hand marked paper ballots, I think. I mean, I don't know what was not in this other set, but I'm pretty sure those were all the BMD ballots. And then there were 5, as we'll talk about, there were 5 ballots from the primary in Fulton, and those were not included in the cast vote record, even though they were numerically included as ballots cast. They really weren't. And there was a few, about 4,000 ballot images, BMD ballot images included in Fulton. So we got a chance to process those, but we were missing, you know, probably this 381,000 is most, well, you can see it's 381,000 BMD ballots. We didn't get to process many of those, and it was 380,459 that were missing images. Sorry. So it looks like some of them were hand-marked paper ballots that were missing. In any case, in Dane, we had more repeated ballots, missing images, and a little bit different spattering here. And the reason is, I won't go into detail, but they had a legal requirement for some ballots to handwrite the voter ID number on the back. And so they weren't really able to give us those images because of that privacy concern. And they also had a number of different precincts in nearby counties where they shared, like they had, we do your precinct, you do our precinct, and so it's not, and so this was fully explained to us, these deviations, but we still had to work with this. All right, and so this is why if we have this sort of these sort of numbers where they're not all zeros, then it's a lot of work to figure it out, because you have to figure this out with the election officials and say, okay, why is this wrong? Now you can see here the margin, and then finally, and we'll look at this in a second, but we had only 10 ballots that were disagreed in Bartow, and those were all resolved. 82 in Fulton that were all resolved, and 28 in Dane County. And those don't get resolved in Dane County by the same mechanism, because they don't have adjudication records in their cast vote record system. So we don't know, but it's still a very low number. And then, excuse me, all variants in this contest, which includes all overvotes and all write-ins, you can see that number, 160, 927, and 1394, still very low compared to the margin. Now we're going to look at some pie charts, and these are the high level number of sheets that we process in each county, and you can kind of look at these sort of quickly, because I'm going to show you the three from the three counties, like all at the same time, and then the next set, and maybe this will work out, we'll see. So this is Bartow County, and now the fully agreed sheets you can see is the pink. That's where everything is agreed on the sheet, and there's no variations at all in terms of write-ins, overvotes, and so forth. And these other sheets here is 6%, were sheets that had at least one contest on them that had a variation of those kinds that I was just mentioning. And we had just a very few ballots that could not get processed, okay? And were ballot variant. All right, next one, Fulton County, this olive, I guess, color here is the missing ballots. So we didn't get the vast majority of the ballots. The fully agreed sheets, and then these are the partially agreed sheets where some of the contests were pulled off. And then same thing for Dane County. Dane County, we got pretty much all of the ballots, and they're pretty much, well, vast majority of them are hand-marked paper ballots. And so we got, these are fully agreed and partially agreed, and now we have more ballot variants because of that stretching problem I talked about. And the image is missing, and so that is something that we had to explain. Next level down, we look at contests. That is not the sheets this time, but the contests within the sheet. So the total number from Bartow is 1 million, approximately individual contests, like a, say, president contest on one sheet would be one ballot contest. And or what we're saying contest here. So we had the ones on fully agreed sheets, we had 981,000 contests on those fully agreed sheets. And these were the contests left over on the ones that were pulled. And then these contests here, 0.853, were the ones where they had any variation at all, you know. Now remember, in Georgia, there's no overvotes because on BMD ballots, and the vast majority of these ballots were BMD type. And so you didn't get as many variations from that. Okay, next in in Fulton, you can see again here, we're missing the many of the sheets, but among the ones that we had, that's what we're talking about here. So among the ones that we had 2.7 million contests evaluated. And on the ones on fully agreed sheets were 87. This is the ones on partially agreed sheets, and the ones left over around 1%. And then moving on to Dane, which is the ES&S system and mostly hand-marked paper ballots. We still had 96.8% fully agreed sheets, 2.29%, a higher percentage. If you go back, well, I guess not exactly from the, this is the contests on the partially agreed sheets. It's still 0.88%, a similar number. So the number of variants that we're working with, this is everything that could possibly be discussed about any ballot that's either disagreed, overvotes, or write-ins, or flags. 0.85, 1%, or 0.88. So you can do a first cut if that's going to change the outcome at this point. If you'd like to, you know, if you're, say, a candidate or a campaign working on a ballot measure or something, you can say, well, gee, that's the number of variants. Maybe I don't need to go any further. But let's just look at that little piece. All right. So in Bartow, we had that 1% or 0.5. Well, what was it? It was 0.583. It's basically 889.10. So it's not quite the same number here, but basically this is the set of variation by contest that were in that other slice, and we see most of them are write-ins, and most of these are going to be reviewed by the county, the jurisdiction, because write-ins, if they're going to be a concern, would be reviewed. So yeah, if it's a contest where there are no write-ins that are going to ever be qualified because nobody signed up to be a write-in, if that's the way they run things, then you wouldn't have to necessarily do it. But most of them are write-ins. This occurs on BMD ballots too. And then we have overvotes, which is the pink, not too many, 1.19%, that were adjudicated, and we know that. And sometimes they did not have any unadjudicated write-ins in Bartow County. So congratulations to Bartow for not leaving any write-in or overvote, I'm sorry, not leaving any of these unadjudicated. But then there was others, and in the other categories, they're either adjudicated or unadjudicated. Very few, as you see, 289 and 39. We're not talking a lot of ballots here. Excuse me. Now we're come down to Fulton, and notice here I do have write-ins, adjudicated and unadjudicated. That's because the Dominion system, you do get to see if things were adjudicated in their cast vote record. But just because it has the adjudicated part doesn't mean they actually did anything, or they didn't, maybe didn't even look at it. They may have looked at a different contest on that ballot, and it still looks like maybe it was adjudicated. So sometimes you get that adjudicated, and it doesn't necessarily mean they looked at it. So we have, as you see here, the goldenrod and the green. These are all the write-ins, whether they've been adjudicated or not. And then we have the BMD write-ins. Okay, they're not going to adjudicate those, but they're just classified that way, pink. And so then we have other and overvotes, very, very few, that were unadjudicated, and quite a few that were adjudicated, but really not that many, as you see. And now this is Fulton. We only got 148,000 of the ballots, but we got 1,449 overvotes plus 7. So really not that many. And so this is the kind of data, by the way, that a risk limiting audit won't tell you. You know, you can go by what they say, but you have nothing in terms of knowing what was adjudicated, not adjudicated. You don't get any of this. Now, finally, in Dane County, which doesn't have adjudicated, non-adjudicated, everything is unadjudicated. You see write-ins, BMD write-ins, and the other, well, we have overvotes, which is this tiny slice, but then this other one is the ones that we looked at. And some of that, we got 1,120. Some of that was a stretching. Some of that was just the variation in voter intent. So getting into the disagreements now. So we're down. So going back to Bartow, we're going to look at just the other, these slices that were pulled out of the pie and put into a new pie so we can look at it more carefully. We have votes that we said were X, they said was Y, but when they adjudicated them, they said, you know what, it's X. And so we ended up being right about our estimate for what the vote would be. That was 252 times out of the 307. There was a few times when we said X, they said Y, and turned out to be Y. And those were those cases that I showed you that there's no way that you're going to figure them out on your own. So we both got them wrong. Or in some cases, we may have gotten one wrong, but you know, it's very few, there's 10. And then there's some undervotes that were resolved to votes. And where we said it was an undervote, and they agreed with us, but it was resolved by adjudication into a vote. Oops. And then there's other disagreed in different categories, a bunch of other categories. So very, very clean. The total number of disagreements there was 307. As you can see, 252 were resolved as we predicted they would be. Another 25 were resolved. These other disagreed were also probably resolved. These were adjudicated and resolved. So there wasn't much of anything that was not resolved by across all contests. There was a couple that were not properly resolved, but almost nothing. Then in Fulton County, you can see the categories here. So this is more 1,900. Going back, it was 307. So this is 1916, the total number of disagreements. But again, what they did was we said X, vote was X. They said it was Y, but they said, you know what, it actually is X. Of the 1,900, we got 1,394 of them right by our prediction without having to go through adjudication. That's pretty good. So 72% of the time, we got it right off the bat. Now, this other category, we said X, they said Y, and they confirmed that it was Y. That isn't necessarily the case. This confirmation in the adjudication system doesn't actually mean that they looked at it. So we got about half of these at least correct, and they were wrong about what the adjudication was. There was sometimes it was an undervote that they said was a vote, and we didn't get that one right. And again, well, I have to look at those to know exactly what they are. But a lot of times what happens is it'll either be a write-in that doesn't have a bubble, so we didn't see that. Sometimes if there is an overvote, it'll kind of override and overwrite a designation of write-in. So if you have an overvote, you don't know that it could have been a write-in, could have been involved. It just triggers overvote, and then that other information is lost. In Dane County, we had 449 disagreements, and these were not adjudicated. They don't have that kind of a package put into their system. So sometimes we're saying X and they said overvote, so maybe it got resolved. We'd have to look at them individually to see. So we don't have that sort of luxury of seeing how they decided these later. All right, moving along then. We found some quirks in each one. I want to go over the quirks. Bartow County had almost nothing of note. The BMDs were all processed except for one. It did take us some time to get it to resolve all of the issues that we had at first, but so I know for sure that it's doing it. You know, Somebody could say, well, it sounds like you're doing such a good job, no one knows it. You got to have some failures here. So we did have one, though, that was kind of curved lines, and it just didn't process right. They adjudicated all the presidential overvotes, and so we know that they had a very clean outcome. However, the overvotes are marked as undervotes, which I understand the rationale for doing this because it allows tracking of adjudications. You know, you've looked at it then. You say, well, that's really an overvote, so I'm going to mark it as an undervote just to keep track of it. Otherwise, there's nothing in the system that allows you to keep track. But what that does is it changes the stats of overvotes and it makes it look like there are none, right? So because you change them all to undervotes. So that's kind of a bad thing, but I understand why they're doing it. We'll have to look at that and see if we can improve the Dominion methodology behind their adjudication, see if we can't get that, keep track. It had one incorrect adjudication, which is no big deal. It was just a mouse click where they accidentally, and you can see in the report where it was a vote for one person and they clicked and made it an overvote. And there was not a second vote there. It was just a mistaken click. So that is something that we can pull out, and indeed the precision of this type of audit is very, very high. So if you say, well, let's do an RLA audit and just do a sampling, you're not going to necessarily hit this one. You might, you might hit this one, but you wouldn't necessarily hit it, so you wouldn't get that one. We found no ballots from other counties or other elections, even though we checked for it, because that was an issue in Fulton County, where we did have a bunch of missing images. 72% of them were missing. But we found some unusual things. We found 5 ballots from DeKalb County mixed in. I'm sorry, they say DeKalb, right? DeKalb County. Got to get my pronunciation correct. So DeKalb County had 5 ballots mixed into Fulton County, and they were included in the canvas, but incorrectly evaluated. The ballots are the same size. It's really hard to miss, easy to miss them, because all you see the difference is DeKalb versus Fulton at the top. But we did happen to find that, and so then we put the check in. So from now on, we'll always be checking that the county is correct. And it would be nice if they had the encoding on the ballot would trigger that. We found also 5 ballots from the May 19th primary. They were not included in the canvas, even though the count of ballots was included. They were not in the cast vote record. And they were longer. The ballots were longer. So instead of being, like 17 inches, they were like 23 inches. I don't know how those get through the system, to be honest. They would be obvious, right? The ballots would be sticking out. So somehow they got in there, though. The other thing that we found, and we didn't see it anywhere else, was that we detected multiple cards in one cast vote record. So we learned about the format that they use of those cast vote records, because we had thought in the cast vote record they have a ballot number, and they have a thing called session, which is for that, and then they have cards, and was only one card ever in a ballot, because there's one image of one sheet front and back. So we didn't know what cards was, so we just used the first card thinking there would only ever be one. Turns out in this case there were 2. And it might have been caused by a jam or something, but then we had to learn that we have to use the second version, and then it's okay. But I'm not going to go into detail, because you can read about it, and some of the theories about why this might happen. We noticed that they use federal-only ballots segregated by precinct, and this causes a privacy hazard. So they had quite a number, I think 650, that were 650 ballots that were federal only, but they were also categorized in something like 200 different precincts. So you split up the 650 by 200, meaning that many times there was only one ballot, and I think the average was 3.2. ballots per precinct. And so that is something that needs to be worked on in terms of either just use the same style number as because these are ballots that come in from UOCOVA voters, they go uniformed and overseas civilian votes. And those ballots are input in the BMD machine, and those could be put into the BMD machine that has all the other court contests, and they only put in the federal versus having a special ballot for that. So that's one thing that we can work on. Let's move on to Fulton County, Dane County. Of course, they had that weirdness that I mentioned where they had some missing cast vote records or images. That was explained, but still some work for us to deal with. There was quite a few images that were stretched or unable. I'm talking about maybe 400 or 500 that were stretched or otherwise corrupted. That we didn't trust that we could process those. And if it got down to needing that last 500 or so, we'd have to look at those by hand. We had no problem with their BMDs at all. So the barcodes matched the data. And this was the case in Bartow, Fulton, the ones we had, and Dane. We also had hand scan verification images from some batches in Dane County. And so we have the possibility of taking hand scan or could be machine, I'm talking about they were scanned by citizens who wanted to make scans of individual batches. Those were something that we had, but we had a little bit of trouble comparing them. So those we might try to include later, but it is an option that we can use. These had no county name on the ballots, so we could not detect that. Okay, so in summary then, we have the ability now to do fully independent ballot image audits. They don't catch everything. I didn't have a special slide for this. There are some things that ballot image audits can't catch. They don't do any eligibility. They don't do any double voting, dead voting, none of that stuff do they catch. The number of people who come into the precinct and whether or not the ballots were stuffed, whether the precinct workers took a bunch of ballots and filled them out and put them in. We're not going to be able to catch that either. There's a bunch of things that it doesn't catch. We also know that it doesn't necessarily catch corrupted, if somebody hacks the machine and corrupts the ballot image. It doesn't catch that either. So there's classes of things that this does not catch. So if someone says, well, that's not perfect, it didn't catch everything in the world, so it's no good. You got to talk about how it's no good, it didn't catch everything. I'm saying it doesn't catch everything, it doesn't catch eligibility. This is a limited scope of what this catches, but it does catch a lot. It catches all of the voter intent issues. It catches a lot of mistakes that we just saw, 5 ballots from here, 5 from there. It was catching mistakes in adjudication. We can catch a lot. So it has a lot of precision to it within the scope of what it can catch. And in this case, we have a cloud-based system. It uses up to 10,000 CPU cores at a time for rapid evaluation. It has adaptive thresholding with artificial intelligence type heuristics. It supports Dominion and ES&S right now, but we can add others like HART and others soon. We use computer-aided mapping using 2 different methods, so we know what we can do it all the time. Have extremely detailed discrepancy reports that I only just barely touched on here. I did want to say that for any contest, we can drill down into that contest and look at every single variant and discrepancy in the contest in the report. It automatically puts in the top 10 contests on the ballot and everything that's within the worst case 5 of each category. It includes those too. So probably the ones are already in the report. And we do support comparison with verification scans, but that still needs some work. So I'm done, and I see a very little bit of time left, but I do want to open up for questions at this time. So if you would like to raise your hand and ask a question, I can do it now. Okay, Neil, go ahead.
Hi, Ray, and thanks again. You know, you're doing amazing work and digging into a lot more detail than most people do, and I appreciate all your efforts on this. I, I just want to parse a couple terms out. So you say fully independent, but as I was pointing out earlier, you're using computer data from the voting system scanners and as handled by the computers that connect to those scanners and all the computers and networks between that and however you got it. So, you know, one question would be, what is the chain of custody between the original paper and the data you're looking at? How long after the election did you get the images? Did the officials share any digital signatures of those images with you? Is there a file of hashes or checksums? You know, like what does that chain of custody look like?
First of all, by independent, I mean that I have no relationship to the counties at all. And AuditEngine was not paid for or developed by the counties. There were no county staff members involved. So this is unlike, say, Clear Ballot, which goes in and they say, you can buy our system and you can use it, and they scan the same people, scan the same batches at the same time. So it's mostly about people. It's independent in terms of the people involved and the code. First of all, the code involved is all different. We know that. The people involved are all different. So this is more independent from that aspect than the alternative, which is Clear Ballot. Now, do we depend upon the images from the system? Yes, and there's a good reason for that. We want to get the images that were produced by the voting system because those can be correlated with the cast vote record that they also made. So we've got a really early piece of data from that computer system, and we have the one on the very other end. So yeah, we can't get back into the actual paper, but it's almost back that far. Okay, so Harvey's drawing on.
So when did you get the data? Did they sign it? I mean, could it have been the last person that gave the data to you that just made something up from whole cloth? It's like,
well, if they made something up, it would be kind of difficult to make up. You'd have to go in and change the ballot image and the cast vote record. So it would be some work. It could be done. But that is a hole that we're trying to fix. And I agree with you that it would be better to be able to reach back into the machine as far as possible and get them to be cryptographically secured. And I'm working on that. I'm working with a thing called the supply chain transparency and integrity, transparency, and trust group in the IETF, the Internet Engineering Task Force, which is working on allowing people to submit whatever it is to a ledger, kind of a blockchain type ledger that would keep track of it. So once those ballot images are created, they can create that kind of a certificate internally. Eventually that gets submitted to that ledger, and then it's locked down. We would be able to detect if they've made changes. So that's how we're gonna kind of attack that. Let's go on to Julie, go ahead.
Thanks. Yeah. Well, I'm left with a couple of questions. One goes back, I didn't quite understand Paul's answer to my question about federal-only ballots and keeping them secure. It occurs to me that in any precinct where there are only a few participants in the election, and it's all a federal election, and you've got, you know, maybe 3 ballots or 5 ballots, and if you're publishing the ballot images and the cast vote records, I don't really, I mean, I advocate for, I mean, we're trying in New York State to pass a ballot images transparency bill to get them posted online, like Dane does, or like we want Arizona to do. But I don't understand how the privacy of people in small precincts can be protected in that case.
Okay, let me try to answer that in this particular case where I mentioned it. In Fulton County, we had, number one, a subset of all the ballots. All right, so they didn't give us all the ballot images. But I analyzed the cast vote record itself, not the ballot images. And amongst all the precincts, there was no threat to any kind of privacy based on just like, that's a really small precinct. The only hazard that was detected was when we looked at the federal only ballots. And so, yeah, there were 650 federal only ballots that were split up into their own styles. And so many times you would have just a onesie, twosie, threesie kind of thing in a ballot style. That if you had the information about that voter being a UACAVA voter, then you might be able to index into their exact ballot. And so that's why we're saying this is a hazard, and it can be corrected by not using different style. Either lump them all into the same style, because they're all, there's about 5 different styles actually in Fulton County. There's the president, the senators, and there was one other Congress member. That's all there was on the ballot. And so you could lump all the ones together that were UACAVA ballots into their own kind of virtual precinct, that they were the same style. Instead of then cutting them up more to say, well, you were in different precincts, we're going to cut all this. So there may be a law that we have to get around to say that you don't necessarily have to report by precinct if they're a UACAVA ballot, so that we get around that. If you wanted to lump them together, the other way to do it is that these are ballots that come in and then they type them into, or button press them into a BMD device. And they could, instead of having a special style just for those people that could only vote on federal races, just use the other style that has all the other contests, but then don't use them. And then they would just get merged into the mainstream of ballots, and you wouldn't see them. And they would be therefore hidden in the vast number of ballots that were there. Now, you could probably go back in, and there's always an argument, and because it's kind of technically impossible to guarantee that you won't have the ability to find out how somebody voted if you have the information. So we would have to hit that, and we've had fairly long discussions about this. I see Tim's queued up here to talk about his favorite subject, and I admire him for taking that on and making sure that we think about it. The fact is that we're probably going to have to say that you can keep your privacy if you don't mark on the ballot, don't put your name on it. So it's something you can waive. You can waive your privacy. In these cases where they're federal only ballots that are a special type of ballot, we can mostly work around it so that they don't see it. But in Fulton County, there was no hazard to anyone being exposed except for this UACAVA ballots. Okay, so Tim, I think you're going to want to talk about the same subject. So why don't you go ahead?
No, I'm looking ahead now, Ray. Thank you so much for this. How can Joseph Quirks' way of arranging the ballots and making sure that there are no duplicates and they're all, how can his system be put forward to everyone who's going to be releasing ballot images down the line? Maybe Joseph could speak to that. Is it the voting system difference, or really what he's doing in handling the data? Thank you.
Well, Joseph,
I'm happy to speak up since I was called by name. Appreciate y'all having me here. Thank you for all your work. I'm not sure that I did anything magical. It's just following the process each step of the way, having good folks who are doing their jobs properly, reconciling your numbers as you go. The size of my jurisdiction helps, but it's to me, it's not rocket science. It's just careful work.
Yeah, I think that's the point. And it is the case that Joseph Quirk is in Bartow County, which is 50,000 ballots, as opposed to Fulton County, which had 500,000, and Dane County, which had around 300,000. So it's a different scale. Nevertheless, I don't know how they get these ballots from the primary mixed in, which are longer ballot, actual ballots in Fulton County. There's something going on there that, even though things match that we found, we still find evidence of some quirks in their system here. Of course, we're missing 380,000 images. That's a little bit of a red flag. So I think that by having, I think that if people realize, gee, there could be a ballot image audit coming my way, I better make sure that everything is clean. That's one thing, versus someone that says, well, no one's ever going to audit me, and I'm auditing myself only. And so therefore I can control everything. That's a different way of, and so therefore maybe things can be more amiss. This was the case in Maricopa County, where they didn't really need to keep the batches together because they didn't expect them to ever be checked. They choose their batches in advance for their audit, and then they choose half of them. They choose 52 batches that are marked in advance that they scan. They say, these are going to be the ones that are audited. We're going to randomly choose only half of them. And then they check those. And so they know that all the rest of them, except for those 52 batches, there was 10,341. So the other 10,000, nearly 300 would never be checked. And so they just sort of threw them in boxes. So if they know, gee, if ballot image audits are around and I can do a good job, they can. Just make sure that in Dane County, they had some legal issues with, they have to write the voter ID number on the back. That's a state law. And so we got to get that undone. They also can kind of clean up who's sharing the ballots from different district and get that sort of cleaned up. So one county. Wisconsin is a weird place. Let's just put it that way. Let's go on to the next question. Okay, Julie.
Thank you. Yeah, my other question is more political. This is incredible work, Ray. Really detailed, technical method of auditing ballot images, hugely valuable. And I guess my question is the political question of how to communicate this right now, excuse me, to both sides in the battle over hand-marked paper ballots. The Democratic election commissioners have their backs up and are saying, no, we can't hand-mark paper ballots because it takes too long and it's more expensive. This is according to NPR yesterday. And the Republicans are saying, ditch the voting machines altogether. We have to hand-mark and hand-count all ballots. So this is a wonderful compromise solution. It should address the issues raised by both sides. But I don't think either side is being rational right now. So how do you break through the tribal defenses that are with everybody with their dukes up right now?
That's
Any
a good
ideas?
question. Honestly, it's kind of beyond the scope of what this meeting can possibly do.
Yeah,
but it is
true.
a problem that I've been trying to wrestle with, because if you say I'm auditing the election, they automatically think, okay, well, that means X about you.
Right.
And then it isn't necessarily true. And then they say, well, you didn't find anything, therefore your method is no good. And that isn't necessarily true either, because there may be nothing to find. Okay, so but I wanted to go back and share really quickly here this example, which we covered before. But so this is in Bartow County, but maybe let's look at Fulton County. Okay, this was almost all paper ballot, hand-marked paper ballots, almost no BMDs, but some mixed in. And we're talking about 1% of the contests. I guess we go back to sheets. Well, let's look at it that way. So basically 1% have a concern. So if they say, oh, it's so expensive to deal with these hand-marked paper ballots, it's just such a mess. Well, of the sheets, 11% had something amiss on them, but there's only 1% of this was, that's not really right. Let's go to the high level Fulton County. Of the ones we looked at, fully agreed sheets, 24 and 3.4% were partially agreed. what I'm trying to get to here, because I didn't have a full set there. Dane is maybe a good one to look at. All right, so we have fully agreed sheets, 93%. Partially agreed sheets, which just had like one contest wrong, there was only 3%. So you have 3% of the sheets to look at the most, that are a concern, that have overvotes, write-ins, or anything. Oh, that's so much work that you have to go to a whole new BMD system just because of the 3%. That doesn't make a lot of sense to me. Like they say, oh, it's so much, we can't have hand-marked paper ballots, too much work. Well, we're talking about only 3% of the ballots have any issue whatsoever. And a lot of them you don't really have to look at because they're a write-in and a contest that doesn't have any write-ins, this sort of thing. Okay, so I want to make sure, was there any other, I just wanted to bring that up real quick. And I see we're a little bit over time. Let me unshare here. And is there any further comments? Okay, I don't see any hand. John, do you want to make a comment?
Yeah, I do.
Good.
Phenomenal presentation. I also want to thank the election administrator here, Joseph Kirk, for being here. And then just maybe add one point that, you know, our country has passed the Rubicon when it comes to elections. All these controversies you just talked about, Ray, are very troubling, okay? What Julie talked about. And obviously, I think that we need in this country is elections that are transparent, trackable, publicly verified, and of course with a ballot library, because the most important document is the original document. And I do believe that you've been a very big part with your system and what you've developed, and we're going, that we're on the right road, hopefully, to stop bad things from happening and prove to the American people that if we had a close election, how close could we be able to go ahead and elaborate and explain it? And so thank you. That's all I'm going to say.
Okay, great. Paul, I didn't notice your hand because I have a black background and it faded in. So go ahead, Paul.
I just raised it.
Oh, okay.
I wanted to mention that currently the commentariat is all excited and anxious on both sides. And there are a lot of Democratic commentators who are saying all is well. If you're trying to audit, then you're a suspicious person. However, going back to 2019, before any controversies of the 2020 election, a year before the election, the Knight Foundation, which is a press-oriented foundation, found, trying to think what it was, 27% of voters, just 27% of voters were very confident that the election results are counted and reported accurately. And 73% were not highly confident. And going back a year before that, Pew Charitable Trusts found that 4% of Democrats and 11% of Republicans were very confident that the elections were protected from hacking and cybersecurity issues. The public has been anxious and worried and doubtful for a very long time, bipartisanly. And I echo Julie's question, how do we get the message out there? But the worry is bipartisan. And I don't know how we get through the media frenzy that tries to make it look partisan. Thanks.
Okay, Joseph Kirk from Bartow County, go ahead.
I'm sorry, I'll be very brief, but what I wanted to share, I've been doing audits here since 2019, you know, some form of tabulation audit, whether it was ballot polling or a batch comparison or a full hand comparison that I do now. And I've gotten a lot of trust in my community as a result. Doing it as a reaction to an election is suspicious. Doing it consistently every time builds a lot of confidence in my experience. And that's what I've been preaching to the other officials here in Georgia. I'm starting to get some ground on that. I'm trying to work on legislation for that. But I think the way forward is education, transparency, as you said, but doing these things consistently, no matter the size of the election, no matter the outcome. This is just what I do every time, and folks have gotten used to it. They were very suspicious of me when I did it in 2021 for the Senate runoff, but that passed very quickly after I kept doing it for every election after that. But thank you very much.
Yeah, no, that's a good point, is that these things need to be routine. The risk limiting audits are usually, unfortunately, limited to just a few key contests, as was the full hand count in Georgia. There were a couple of contests in the counties that I reviewed that were very close. They weren't the ones that they necessarily hand counted, but they were very close and deserved additional scrutiny. And sometimes the local or county level races or local races are extremely important and yet are missed by these other audits. So I look carefully at the risk limiting audits. I thought it was going to be, the cat's meow for everything. And then I learned that it was just going to be very, very difficult to apply when the margins are super close, or they are, or they're small. So these ballot image audits, a little bit different way. They're very, very precise. They have a different scope, but I think people can understand that every single audit that you do has a different scope. A risk limiting audit has nothing to do with eligibility. They don't know if the ballot box has been stuffed, none of that. So they have the same limitation in many ways that this type of audit has. And what we're saying, though, is that it's consistent between the ballot images and the cast vote record. So it is a consistency. Okay, let's try to close down the meeting. John, you want a last comment before we close?
Yeah, if I could, just this one statement: transparency is the currency of trust, and it is an important remedy to unverifiable claims of fraud and manipulation. That's what we're fighting, and thank you again, Ray.
Yeah, you have to build trust. Trust is not something that you just can snap your fingers and get. And the way they build trust in, like, if you're a manufacturer, and running an election is kind of like a manufacturing process. You have, and it's really the only manufacturing process that the government, does on a regular basis. They have to do. That it's a manufacturing, and their product is this election result, the canvas. And what you do in a normal production type of environment, and the key word is you test early and you test often. You test as early as you can to make sure that every sub-assembly works. You then combine it into a next assembly. You test that, and you build it up, test all the way through until finally, now that builds trust from the bottom all the way up, because you're testing every little thing. All the leaves of the tree, if you will, were tested. And then as you combine them, then you know that the result is true. And so there are some missing pieces here, I think, in the procedures that they use. They do usually a logic and accuracy test. They say, well, we tested before, we made sure our system was going to work, but we didn't do any testing during the actual process until the very end, and then we check it a little bit to see if it's okay. I think there needs to be checks along the way. And that's why I'm going to be fighting for checking that the ballot images and the very first image matches the ballot. It doesn't have to be done as rigorously, but if you're doing it as a process control type of statistical test, it takes far fewer, maybe one ballot per batch. You just check, you say, how's the fidelity? How's the rotation? Is it straight? Is it non-stretched? Does it look the same? Done. And you do that randomly throughout your process of scanning if you're doing a central scanning operation. Now, they're using QR codes, and the thing is that those are very hard to check, except for something like AuditEngine. So here we've shown, and this is kind of one of the big takeaways here, I think I should underline again. We're looking at all of not the QR codes, we're looking at the text, the stuff that the voter has supposedly checked. And I put that in bold in my press release. We need an education process, and this is also for you, Joseph Kirk, in your area. We need to tell voters to check their ballot summary sheet to check to see if it matches how they wanted to vote. And if we get that check in there, then we can potentially catch the anything that AuditEngine would not catch, because we're looking at the text and we're going directly from the text to the other thing. Okay, so so you're 2 or 3 steps ahead up. Okay, good. I'm glad to hear that. Thanks, Joseph. So I'm in touch with, by the way, with the Board of Elections in Georgia. I've been talking with a woman there who's a newcomer. Her name is Dr. Janice Johnston, and we've been in a number of phone conversations. I'm gonna be talking to her to see if we can't get a presentation at the election board. And there, by the way, Joseph, that's the place I want to give you your award for doing such a good job. So thanks again, everybody, and we will appreciate being able to make this video so that other people can see it. And I want to thank you for coming. Okay, thanks. Bye-bye.